power armor is the single most iconic piece of technology in the entire Fallout franchise. It's on the box art, it's in the trailers, it's the thing every new player spends their first 20 hours trying to find, and the thing every veteran player has 6 of sitting in a garage they built specifically to show them off. But here's the thing, most people couldn't actually tell you what the hell all the Fallout power armor models are, how they're different from each other, or why some of them even exist. Because the lore behind these walking tanks goes deep, and the further you dig, the weirder it gets. That's what we're doing today, breaking down every power armor model in Fallout, from the very first clunky prototype to the terrifying endgame suits that make Deathclaws nervous. Just what the hell are all the Fallout power armor models? I went through every game, every terminal entry, every loading screen, and every lore document I could find to piece this together. Some of it was straightforward, some of it contradicts itself depending on which game you ask, but that's Fallout for you. So let's start at the very beginning, before power armor was even power armor, the prototype era. Before power armor became the symbol of military dominance in Fallout's America, it was a desperate idea sketched on a whiteboard by engineers who were running out of time. The resource wars were grinding through infantry faster than the military could replace them, and conventional body armor wasn't cutting it anymore. So the US government did what it always did when it needed a miracle, threw an enormous check at West Tech and said, figure it out. What they figured out would change the Fallout universe permanently. But the first few attempts? Those were rough. The earliest power armor prototypes weren't the sleek, iconic suits you see in the games. They were crude, bulky exoskeletons that barely functioned. The first iterations could amplify a soldier's strength, sure, but they were clumsy, unreliable, and had a nasty habit of burning through power supplies faster than you could replace them. Think about that. You strap yourself into a metal exoskeleton that could run out of power mid-combat. Would you trust that with your life? Pre-war America said yes, because deadlines don't care about your test results. Early test subjects reportedly had trouble walking in straight lines, which is exactly the kind of feature you want in military hardware you're deploying to an active war zone. But the thing about prototypes is that they get better, and West Tech's engineers were nothing if not persistent. Each iteration fixed problems, improved mobility, and extended operational time. The power supply issue was eventually solved with small-scale fusion cores, miniaturized nuclear reactors that could keep a suit running far longer than any battery ever could. Once that piece clicked into place, power armor went from interesting concept to the single most important infantry technology ever developed. And the first model to actually earn that title was sitting on the assembly line, ready for the front. But there's an important gap between we built a working prototype and we can produce thousands of these and ship them to a war zone. Prototypes don't win wars. Production models do, and getting from one to the other meant solving problems that had nothing to do with engineering. Supply chains, manufacturing capacity, training programs, field maintenance protocols. The technology was ready. The question was whether the military-industrial machine could scale it fast enough to matter before the front lines collapsed entirely. The prototypes proved that strapping a soldier into a powered exoskeleton could work, but could work doesn't win wars. For that, you need something you can manufacture, deploy, and trust not to fall apart mid-firefight, and the T-45 was supposed to be that suit. Emphasis on supposed to, because what actually showed up on the front lines was less Iron Man and more angry forklift with delusions of grandeur. T-45. The T-45 is where power armor stops being a science project and starts being a weapon of war. And if you've played Fallout 4, you've already met one. It's literally the first suit the game hands you, right before a Deathclaw shows up, and the game politely suggests you figure out how to use it or die. Subtle introduction, Bethesda. Real subtle. The T-45D was the first power armor model to see full-scale mass production and active combat deployment. Rolled out around 2067 during the Sino-American War, it was shipped to the Alaskan front line where US forces were desperately trying to push back the Chinese invasion. And despite being the earliest production model, the one with the most kinks, the most limitations, and the most will fix it in the next version compromises, the T-45 immediately changed the war. Chinese infantry simply couldn't compete. Their weapons couldn't reliably penetrate the armor, and the strength amplification meant that a single soldier in T-45 could do the work of an entire squad. But let's not romanticize it. The T-45 was heavy, clunky, and a maintenance nightmare. It chewed through resources, required extensive training to operate, and the early fusion core integration wasn't nearly as efficient as later models would achieve. Soldiers who wore it described it as exhausting. Yes, even with the strength amplification, the suit's weight distribution was imperfect enough that extended wear left operators drained. You'd think that would be a deal breaker, right? A suit that exhausts the soldier wearing it? But when the alternative is getting shot without any armor at all, exhausting starts sounding pretty reasonable. It's the kind of suit where you're technically superhuman, but you also feel every single pound of the thing every single minute. Think of it less as wearing Iron Man's armor and more as driving a really aggressive forklift that you can't take off. And yet, for all its flaws, the T-45 was revolutionary. It proved that power armor wasn't just viable, it was decisive. The Chinese had no immediate counter. The front lines shifted, and the US military, seeing what even this imperfect first model could do, immediately greenlit development of something better. After the Great War, the T-45 didn't disappear. It became the backbone of the Brotherhood of Steel's early operations. When Roger Maxson and his followers walked away from the military and formed the Brotherhood, they brought T-45 suits with them, and for decades, that was enough. In a world where most people were fighting with pipe weapons and baseball bats, a T-45 was essentially a cheat code. The Brotherhood's early dominance wasn't built on superior numbers or brilliant strategy. It was built on the simple fact that they had power armor and almost nobody else did. That advantage shaped the Brotherhood's entire identity. When your technology is the reason you survive, it's not hard to see how you'd start treating technology as sacred. The T-45 did its job. It held the line, it proved the concept, but it also proved something darker, that the moment you put one soldier in a suit that makes them worth 10, you've created a two-tier battlefield. The people inside the armor matter. The people outside it become acceptable losses. That logic didn't start with power armor, but power armor made it literal. And the US military liked what it saw enough to immediately demand something better, something that would become the most iconic suit of armor in gaming history. The T-45 stepped aside, reluctantly, because the military kept using T-45 units for decades even after superior models existed, because governments are exactly as efficient as you'd expect. If the T-45 was the rough draft that won battles through brute force, the next model was the finished masterpiece that won the war through engineering brilliance, and it looked incredible doing it. T-51. The T-51B is the power armor. Not the first, not the most advanced, but the one that defines the entire concept. It's on the cover of the original Fallout. It's the suit that players have associated with the franchise since 1997, and in-universe, it represents the absolute peak of what pre-war America could engineer when it poured unlimited resources into making one soldier worth an army. If the T-45 was the proof of concept, the T-51 was the thesis statement. Deployed around 2076, just a year before the world ended, the T-51B was everything the T-45 wasn't. Lighter, more efficient, better protected. The armor plating used a polylaminate composite, multiple bonded layers of advanced materials that could absorb and deflect energy and ballistic damage far beyond anything the T-45 offered. The power system was refined to a degree that still sounds absurd. The T-51B's TX-28 microfusion pack could theoretically sustain operations for centuries under ideal conditions, with some sources suggesting over 1,000 years of continuous use. Whether that number is propaganda or genuine engineering, it doesn't matter. The point is that power consumption, the T-45's biggest weakness, was essentially solved. The servo motors were smoother, the weight distribution was better, and the integrated HUD systems gave operators tactical awareness that made them as dangerous at range as they were up close. And the results spoke for themselves. T-51B units are credited with turning the tide of the Battle of Anchorage. Chinese forces, already struggling against the T-45, found themselves facing a suit that was faster, tougher, and operated by soldiers who were no longer fighting their own equipment just to stay upright. The liberation of Anchorage became a showcase for what power armor could do when the engineering actually caught up to the ambition. It's the closest thing pre-war America had to a "we win" button, and they pressed it hard. But here's the detail that makes the T-51 genuinely fascinating from a lore perspective. It was the best. Full stop. Every official source from the original games establishes the T-51B as the pinnacle of pre-war power armor technology. Nothing that came before matched it, and by the time the bombs fell, nothing that came after had surpassed it either. The T-51 wasn't just good for its time, it was the ceiling. The T-51 was so good it basically made every engineer who worked on it unemployable. What do you even do after you build the perfect thing? Retire? In pre-war America? Good luck with that. And that matters because of what came next. next. Have you ever finished something you're genuinely proud of, only to watch someone come along and make a budget version that technically replaces it? Yeah, that's basically what happened to the T-51. And the suit that replaced it in the field is one of the most debated pieces of Fallout lore in the entire community, T-60. The T-60 is a perfectly good suit of power armor that committed the unforgivable sin of existing, because according to every piece of Fallout lore established before 2015, the T-51B was the best power armor that pre-war America ever built. Then Fallout 4 showed up and casually introduced a model that apparently came after the T-51, got mass-produced, and became the Brotherhood of Steel's primary armor for the entire game, and the lore community has been arguing about it ever since. Here's what Fallout 4 tells us. The T-60 was deployed after the Battle of Anchorage, meaning it came after the T-51B chronologically. Soldiers wearing T-60 were among those trying to maintain order on the streets when the bombs fell on October 23, 2077. The Brotherhood of Steel, particularly the East Coast chapter under Elder Maxon, uses it as their standard issue armor throughout Fallout 4, making it one of the most visible power armor models in the entire series. If you've ever seen a Brotherhood vertibird dropping off soldiers on a rooftop, those soldiers were wearing T-60. So if the T-51 was the best, how does the T-60 exist without contradicting everything? The answer that most of the community has settled on, and the one that makes the most sense mechanically, is that the T-60 wasn't designed to be better than the T-51. It was designed to be cheaper. The T-51B was an engineering masterpiece. But masterpieces are expensive. When you're fighting a resource war and you need to armor thousands of soldiers as fast as possible, you can't afford to give everyone the Rolls-Royce. So the T-60 was built as a cost-effective upgrade path for existing T-45 frames. Better than the T-45, more affordable than the T-51, and good enough to get bodies into the field quickly. It's the Honda Civic of power armor. Not the flashiest thing on the road, but reliable, practical, and everywhere. Does that fully resolve the lore contradiction? Honestly, not really. The fact that Bethesda never explicitly explained this in-game means the community had to piece together the justification themselves, and some fans are still salty about it. But I'll say this, as a gameplay experience, the T-60 works. It gives the Brotherhood a distinct visual identity. It creates a clear upgrade path for players, and it looks undeniably cool. Sometimes good design sense and perfect lore alignment don't live in the same vault. You learn to deal with it. What I think gets lost in the debate is that the T-60's existence actually makes pre-war America feel more realistic, not less. Governments don't always build the best possible version of something. They build whatever they can produce fast enough and cheap enough to meet a deadline. The T-60 isn't a lore failure, it's a procurement decision. And if you've ever watched a real-world military contract choose good enough and on schedule over perfect, but 3 years late, the T-60 suddenly makes a lot more sense. If the T-60 represents pre-war America's attempt to mass-produce power armor on a budget, the next suit on this list represents what happens when the people with the most resources and the fewest ethics build something exclusively for themselves and don't plan on sharing. X-01. Every power armor model we've talked about so far was built to serve the United States military. The T-45, the T-51, the T-60, all designed to protect soldiers, win wars, and advance American interests. The X-01 is different. The X-01 was built by and for the Enclave, the shadow government that considered everyone outside their bunker to be expendable genetic material. And they built it to make absolutely certain that if they ever had to step outside, nothing on the planet could stop them. So what happens when the most powerful people in America decide they need personal armor that nobody else is allowed to have? Exactly what you'd expect. They build something terrifying and pretend it doesn't exist. The X-01, which is the designation used in Fallout 4, is directly connected to the advanced power armor from Fallout 2, the suit that made the Enclave the single most terrifying faction in the early games. The exact development timeline is one of those areas where the lore gets a little blurry depending on which game you're looking at. In Fallout 2, the advanced power armor was developed post-war by the Enclave on their oil rig. In Fallout 4, loading screens describe the X-01 as being developed by remnants of the US military after the bombs fell. Either way, the through line is clear. This was never meant for the rank and file. This was meant for the people who planned to inherit what was left of the world. And the engineering reflects that philosophy. The X-01 is superior to every pre-war model in virtually every category. Better protection, better better power efficiency, more advanced materials, more sophisticated systems integration. Where the T-51 was the peak of what America could build for its soldiers, the X-01 is the peak of what America could build when it stopped pretending it was building for everyone. It's the difference between a public hospital and a private clinic. Same general concept, but one of them has significantly better everything, because the people paying for it don't pay. In Fallout 2, encountering Enclave soldiers in advanced power armor was a genuine oh no moment. These weren't raiders in scrap metal, these were professionally trained operatives wearing the most advanced personal armor on the planet, carrying weapons that matched. The Chosen One's first encounter with an Enclave patrol was the game's way of saying the real threat just showed up, and it's wearing better gear than anything you've ever seen. Frank Horrigan, the Enclave's final boss, wore a custom suit that was essentially X-01 on steroids, and he was arguably the most physically dangerous antagonist in the franchise's history. The X-01 also spawned upgrades. The Advanced Power Armor, Mark II, seen on Enclave officers in Fallout 2 and carried forward into Fallout 3, was a refinement that improved on an already terrifying design. Sleeker, lighter, more protective, the Mark II wasn't just a stat bump, it was a statement of intent. Where the original Advanced Power Armor proved the Enclave could build something better than the pre-war military, the Mark II proved they intended to keep going. In Fallout 3, regular Enclave soldiers wore the standard Advanced Power Armor while officers and elite units wore the Mark II, meaning the Enclave had its own internal hierarchy of armor distribution, the same kind of tiered access that pre-war America used with the T-45, T-51, and T-65. Even the faction that claimed to represent the real America couldn't resist replicating its worst habits. The powerful got the best gear. Everyone else got whatever was left. Some patterns survive nuclear fire, but superior engineering has limits when your enemies start developing specialized countermeasures. So, the Enclave did what the Enclave always does. They escalated, and the result was a suit so aggressive, so specialized for destruction, that they named it after the thing it was designed to deliver: Hellfire. If the X-01 was the Enclave saying we're better than you, Hellfire Power Armor was the Enclave saying, and we're going to burn everything you love to prove it. This is the suit that shows up in Fallout 3's Broken Steel DLC, worn by Hellfire troopers, the Enclave's heavy assault specialists deployed after the events of the main game, when the organization was getting desperate and decided subtlety was no longer on the agenda. Hellfire armor was purpose-built for one thing: overwhelming destruction in close quarters. The suit is heavier than standard Enclave armor, with additional plating and heat-resistant materials designed to allow the wearer to walk through fire, both figuratively and literally. Hellfire troopers were equipped with heavy incendiary weapons, and the armor was designed to let them deploy those weapons at ranges that would kill anyone wearing anything less. You want to use a flamethrower in combat? Cool, most armors will let you. You want to stand in the fire while you're using it? That's Hellfire. What makes Hellfire particularly memorable from a gameplay perspective is where you encounter it. By the time Broken Steel sends you to Adams Air Force Base, you've already beaten the main game, you've already fought through the Enclave's standard forces, you've dealt with their vertibirds, their officers, their checkpoints, and then the game introduces a new tier of enemy wearing armor you've never seen before. Heavier, meaner, and carrying weapons that can end you in seconds if you're not prepared. It's the game's way of reminding you that the Enclave always had another card to play. They were losing, and they still had something in reserve. That's either impressive discipline or pathological stubbornness. Knowing the Enclave, it's probably both. The design philosophy behind Hellfire tells you everything you need to know about where the Enclave was, mentally, by the time Broken Steel takes place. They'd lost the Purifier battle. Liberty Prime had torn through their defensive line. Their leadership was fractured, and their response wasn't to retreat or negotiate, it was to build a suit of armor so aggressive that it turned their soldiers into walking napalm dispensers. That's not a strategy. That's despite wearing power armor. And honestly, I kind of respect the commitment, even if the logic is completely unhinged. Hellfire is also significant because it represents the endpoint of Enclave power armor development, at least as far as the games have shown us. After Broken Steel, the Enclave is effectively destroyed on the East Coast. Whatever research they had, whatever prototypes were in development, it all goes dark. Hellfire is the last word the Enclave ever got to say about power armor, and they made sure it was loud, hot, and impossible to ignore. The Enclave built power armor for dominance. The pre-war military built it for war. But what happens when someone looks at power armor and doesn't see a weapon at all? What happens when the design brief isn't kill things but dig rocks? Because the answer is one of the most unexpectedly beloved suits in the entire franchise. Excavator. Not every suit of power armor was built to fight wars. Some were built to dig holes. And that's not a joke. The Excavator power armor is one of the most practically designed, non-military suits in the entire Fallout universe. And it exists because a mining company in Appalachia looked at the collapsing global economy and said, what if we could mine faster? The Excavator was developed by Garahan Mining, a major mining operation in pre-war West Virginia. With automation threatening jobs and resources dwindling, Garahan designed the Excavator as a way to boost mining efficiency, a suit that could let a single operator do the work of an entire crew. The armor isn't built for combat. The plating is minimal. The design prioritizes joint articulation and carrying capacity over protection. If you wore an Excavator into a fight against someone in T-51, you'd last about as long as a rad roach at a Brotherhood convention. But if you needed to rip through a mine shaft and haul 2 tons of ore back to the surface before lunch, nothing else in the franchise comes close. What makes the Excavator story genuinely tragic is the context. Garahan Mining wasn't just competing against other companies, it was competing against automation. Hornwright Industrial, its biggest rival, was pushing hard into automated mining systems that threatened to make human miners obsolete. The Excavator was Garahan's counterpunch, a way to make human workers productive enough to justify keeping them employed. It was technology designed to save jobs, which is maybe the most un-Fallout motivation for building power armor you could imagine. And it didn't work, not because the suit failed, but because the world ended before the economic argument could play out. In Fallout 76, the Excavator is one of the first full power armor sets many players built, and it's genuinely useful. It increases the amount of ore you can harvest from mineral deposits. It's the most practical suit in the game because it actually does what it was designed to do. No secret weapons program, no classified military experiment, just a mining company trying to stay competitive in a dying economy. And honestly, there's something refreshing about that. In a franchise full of shadow governments and illegal experiments, the Excavator is just a tool that somebody built to do a job. The fact that the world ended before it could save Garahan Mining from bankruptcy is just Fallout being Fallout. The Excavator proves that power armor technology wasn't limited to the military. The concept was versatile enough that civilian companies could adapt it for completely different purposes. Which raises an interesting question. If a mining company could build a specialized suit, what could you build if you had access to a material that didn't exist anywhere else on Earth? Ultrasite Appalachia doesn't follow the same rules as the rest of the Fallout universe. It has its own ecosystem, its own threats, and its own materials, including one that the rest of the wasteland has never seen. Ultrasite is a unique crystalline mineral found exclusively in the Appalachian region, and it just happens to be one of the most durable, energy-dense substances anyone has ever discovered. So naturally, someone figured out how to make power armor out of it. Ultrasite power armor was developed in response to the Scorch Beast threat, the massive, irradiated bat-like creatures that terrorized Appalachia and spread the Scorched Plague. The Brotherhood of Steel contingent that traveled to Appalachia recognized that conventional power armor wasn't cutting it against these things. Scorch Beasts could unleash devastating sonic attacks and irradiated breath that degraded standard plating faster than it could be repaired. So the Brotherhood, working with local resources, developed ultrasite armor, suits reinforced with the crystalline material that provided significantly enhanced radiation resistance and overall durability. The result is one of the most protective suits in Fallout 76, and one of the most visually distinctive in the franchise. Ultrasite armor has a raw, crystalline aesthetic. It looks less like military hardware and more like someone raided a geology museum and got really creative with a welding torch, but it works. The material's natural energy properties complement the suit's fusion core systems, and the radiation resistance makes it specifically suited for fighting in the heavily irradiated environments that Scorch Beasts tend to create. So here's the question. If a post-war faction in a single region of Appalachia could develop power armor using materials nobody had ever seen before, what does that say about what the rest of the wasteland could be building that we haven't discovered yet? But look, what makes Ultrasite significant beyond its stats is what it represents for the franchise's world building. This is power armor developed post-war, using materials that the pre-war military never had access to. It's proof that power armor technology didn't freeze when the bombs fell. People kept innovating, kept adapting, kept finding new ways to improve on what came before. The T-45 through T-60 were products of a functioning industrial nation. Ultrasite was built in a wasteland, from materials nobody had ever seen, to fight monsters nobody had planned for, and it worked. That's either inspiring or terrifying, depending on how much faith you have in humanity's ability to build things specifically designed to kill other things. If Ultrasight proves that the Wasteland could innovate new power armor using materials nobody expected, the next suit proves that the pre-war government was hiding things that make even the Enclave's arsenal look modest. Because when the Secret Service builds power armor, they don't put it on the battlefield. They lock it in a vault and pretend it doesn't exist. T-65. You know how every government has classified projects that the public doesn't know about? Things that are technically legal but would cause a massive controversy if anyone ever found out? In Fallout's America, the Secret Service wasn't just protecting the president. They were sitting on power armor technology that makes everything else on this list look like a science fair project. And they kept it locked inside Vault 79, where nobody would ever find it, until somebody did. You ever wonder why the pre-war government was hoarding so many secrets? Because every time you open one of their vaults, there's something inside that makes you realize the surface-level story was never the whole truth. So, the T-65 is the Secret Service's personal power armor, introduced in Fallout 76's Wastelanders update. It was stored inside Vault 79, the same vault that also happened to contain the nation's gold reserves. Because when you're the Secret Service, you don't just guard the president, you guard everything the government doesn't want anyone else touching. The T-65 represents what happens when power armor development isn't constrained by budgets, production timelines, or the need to equip thousands of soldiers. This suit was built for a small, elite unit with effectively unlimited funding and zero obligation to share. And the specs reflect that exclusivity. In Fallout 76, the T-65 offers some of the highest base damage and energy resistance of any power armor in the game. It's not just good, it's competitive with Ultrasight and Strangler heart sets that require significantly more effort to obtain. The Secret Service didn't need to mass produce this. They didn't need to make it cost-effective. They just needed it to be the best, and they had the budget to make that happen. Imagine a world where the only thing limiting your engineering is physics, and even that's negotiable if you throw enough money at it. That's the T-65. But here's what I find most interesting about the T-65 from a lore perspective. Its existence confirms something that the Fallout universe keeps proving over and over. The pre-war government was always holding back its best technology from the public and even from its own military. The soldiers on the front lines got T-45s and T-51s. The Enclave got X-01, and the Secret Service got something that might have been better than all of them, locked in a vault that nobody was supposed to open. Pre-war America didn't just have a two-tier society. It had a two-tier military-industrial complex, and the second tier didn't officially exist. The T-65 is the final and maybe most damning piece of evidence that power armor was never just about protecting soldiers, it was about control. Who had the best technology, who got access to it, and who was deliberately kept in the dark. The same government that sent kids in T-45 suits to die in Alaska had a vault full of superior armor that it reserved for bodyguards and gold storage. If that doesn't perfectly summarize pre-war America's priorities, nothing does. The T-65 represents the absolute ceiling of what institutional power could engineer when money was no object, and secrecy was guaranteed. But the Wasteland doesn't care about institutions. It cares about survival, and survival means that somewhere out there, someone looked at a pile of scrap metal and a rusted power armor frame and thought, yeah, I can make that work. And the horrifying part? They were right. Raider Power Armor is the Wasteland's answer to a question nobody asked. What if power armor, but terrible, found across the Commonwealth in Fallout 4 and Appalachia in Fallout 76, these cobbled-together nightmares are assembled from salvaged parts, scrap metal, car doors, stop signs, and whatever else the local raider boss could bolt onto a vaguely humanoid frame. There's no standardized design, no engineering specifications, no quality control. Every suit is essentially a unique folk art project created by someone whose design philosophy is more metal equals more protection, and whose safety testing consists of put it on and see if it kills you. If you've ever tried to fix something around your house with whatever random tools you had lying around and thought close enough, congratulations! You understand the Raider Power Armor design philosophy. And statistically, yeah, Raider Power Armor is the worst power armor in the game. Lowest protection values, lowest durability. The kind of armor that makes you technically a power armor user the same way that putting a cardboard box on your head technically makes you an astronaut. But here's the thing, and I think this is genuinely underappreciated. Raider Power Armor is also one of the most important pieces of world building in the franchise, because its existence proves that power armor technology, in its most basic form, is understandable by regular people. Think about what that means. 200 years after the world ended, people with no formal engineering training, no access access to schematics, and no institutional knowledge are looking at rusted power armor frames and figuring out how to make them work. They're not doing it well. The suits are ugly, fragile, and probably a health hazard just from the lead paint, but they're doing it. The fundamental principles behind power armor, hydraulic amplification, load-bearing exoskeleton design, fusion core integration, are simple enough that a raider with a wrench and a dream can produce a functional, if deeply questionable, result. And that loops back to every single suit we've covered today. The T-45 proved power armor could change a war. The T-51 proved it could win one. The T-60 proved it could be mass-produced. The X-01 proved it could be hoarded by the powerful. Hellfire proved it could be weaponized beyond reason. The Excavator proved it could serve peace. Ultrasight proved the wasteland could innovate beyond what the old world imagined. The T-65 proved the government was always hiding its best cards. And Raider power armor proves that none of those gates, military access, corporate funding, government clearance, actually matter in the end. The technology survives because the idea survives. Strap metal to a frame, power it up, and walk forward. That's all it ever was. That's either a testament to the brilliance of the original engineering or an indictment of how simple the technology actually is once you strip away the military polish. Either way, Raider power armor is proof that the wasteland doesn't just consume technology. It adapts it, butchers it, and bolts it back together into something that works just well enough to be dangerous. And honestly, in a franchise about humanity's refusal to stop building things even after those things destroy the world, that feels pretty on brand. And that's every major power armor model in Fallout, from the first crude prototype that could barely walk straight to the classified Secret Service suit locked behind a vault door with the nation's gold. What started as a desperate military project to save infantry lives became the most significant technology in the franchise, a symbol of power, control, and the question that Fallout never stops asking: who gets access to the best tools, and what do they do with them? Every suit on this list exists because someone decided that the human body wasn't enough, not tough enough, not strong enough, not intimidating enough, and every single time the solution was the same: add more metal, add more power, add more technology until the person inside becomes something more than human. The pre-war government did it to win a war. The Enclave did it to control a species. The Brotherhood did it to preserve an ideology. The Secret Service did it to guard secrets. Mining companies did it to dig. And Raiders did it because something with claws was trying to eat them, and they had some spare car parts. Different motivations, same instinct. When the world gets dangerous, build a bigger shell. But the real lesson of Fallout's power armor isn't about the armor itself. It's about what people do once they're inside it. The T-45 didn't make America moral. The X-01 didn't make the Enclave right. The T-65 didn't make the Secret Service transparent. Power armor amplifies the person wearing it, their strength, their agenda, their flaws. It's the most powerful technology in the Fallout universe, and it has never once, in any game, in any timeline, actually solved the problem it was built to address. The wars continued, the corruption deepened, the wasteland kept being the wasteland. War never changes, but the armor keeps getting better. Well, usually. Sorry, Raiders. If you enjoyed this and want to see why every Fallout corporation was running illegal experiments, click the video on screen.